a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Porchlight Letters podcast number 2511. We're getting up there in numbers. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, forgotten family cemeteries. I love cemeteries. I don't care if they're private cemeteries, if they're churchyard cemeteries, if they are public cemeteries. I just love cemeteries, period. I love the peacefulness that you get when you're there. I love the stories that are on the tombstones that you may not see. One of my favorite things, this might sound a little creepy, but I have done this because that's the type of person that I am and what it is that I love, is that I have even found a tombstone that I like out because of the information on there. Something written on the tombstone or the headstone has sparked something inside me that says, I've got to find out more. And so I will actually go ahead, write down the details that's on the tombstone, go home, do some research on the person, find their obituary, and then start reconstructing their lives and seeing what other information I can find out about this person or these people that are in this grave. Another favorite thing to do is to stop by the cemetery office and ask to look at the plot records. Excuse me, because often, I don't know about other places. I actually didn't do this in the States. And we just went and asked where certain graves were and they marked them on the map. We never looked at the plot records. But here in New Zealand, you can go to the office at the cemetery and ask to see the plot records. And they'll bring over the plot records, and the plot record shows who purchased the plot, when they purchased it, when the plot was open, and the reason it was open to inter ashes? Was it open to inter a coffin? And then it lists everybody that has been interred into that plot, which may not match, and quite often is the case, does not match the headstone or the tombstone of the grave marker for that plot. It may not recognize everybody that's in there. And you can find some very interesting facts out about stuff like that, about who is in the grave. It can be quite funny at times. Like one of them, let me see if I can get the story right. My second great grandmother did not like one of her son-in-laws, like absolutely detested him, hated the fact that her daughter had married him. She kind of had to accept him because that's who her daughter loved and they had a great relationship, but she could not stand this guy. When we went to the cemetery and we asked to see the plot records, my mum starts laughing. I go, what's so? And this is when my mum was mainly doing the research, and I was along as her research assistant. And I said to her, I says, what's so funny? She says, your second great grandmother here, she couldn't stand this guy that's been buried with her. That when he passed away, they put him in her tombstone. They did not change the engravings on the tombstone. They just opened up the plot and buried him in there. And I'm just like, oh. And she told me the story behind it, and I just couldn't stop laughing. I was like, yeah, that probably went down well with the second great grandmother's spirit, that the son-in-law she detested was buried with her for eternity. So you can find all sorts of things. But when you're talking about forgotten family cemeteries, these are ones where you've had a homestead and you've put a corner or marked an area away where generations have been buried, who have lived on the homestead. They've been buried as they've passed away in this little family cemetery. It's usually on private property. And so they can be interesting to look at if you can get on the land to look at them. You got to get permission to look at them because it's on private land. And it's one of the saddest realities in family history is that some family cemeteries are eventually forgotten. It could be a small burial site on a farm, a handful of graves on private land, a cemetery hidden by trees and overgrowth, a resting place remembered only by older generations. And as families move away and memories fade, the location of these cemeteries can sometimes be lost, which is an unfortunate thing. Yet these places often hold important clues. Headstones may reveal names, dates, relationships, military service, religious affiliations, and family connections that cannot be found elsewhere. This could be before the time when births and deaths were registered and were required to be registered. So they may not have them unless the church has there the baptism and the funeral. Usually the birth date is not on the baptismal record. Some churches would write the birth date on the baptismal record. So you kind of had an approximate about. But then you have to remember that some kids didn't get baptized till they were like 5, 6, 7, or 8. So you could put the baptismal date in there, and then you just had to guesstimate what the birthday was, unless you get a death record that has it mentioned on there. Even when markers have withered or disappeared, cemetery records, local histories, land records, and family stories can help reconstruct what once existed. For genealogists, forgotten cemeteries are more than burial places. They are historical records. They represent real people who lived, worked, raised families, faced challenges, and helped shape future generations. Visiting an ancestral cemetery can provide something that documents alone cannot: a sense of place. Standing where ancestors are buried often reminds us that family history is not simply a collection of names and dates. It is the story of real lives lived by real people. Sometimes the path to understanding our family history begins in a place that the world has forgotten, but the family should not. And I will tell you, there's a book that I have, which I don't have with me. It could be out in a box in the garage, but it's called In Search of Our Ancestors. And there was a TV series put out by PBS at one point, and this book accompanied that. They had a lot of stories that they would tell on the series and In Search of Our Ancestors, but in the book they wrote other stories in there as well. And they were talking about how their ancestors guided them to certain places. Everything just kind of, pieces of the puzzle just fall together, and all of a sudden you're in the spot that you need to be in, and you've got no idea how you got there. There's one story I always remember, and there was upstate New York. They were driving along the road. They got a flat tire. They were heading to this little hinky town, which had like a population of less than about 1,000 or less, to visit the cemeteries to find their her or his, it was either the wife's or the husband's, I can't remember which one, second great grandparents. They were going to go and visit their graves because they were told that they'd been buried in this town. And they were probably about 4 or 5 miles out of town when they got a flat tire. And so while the husband's changing the tire, the woman got this urge. She said it was just like a huge urge just came through her that she had to climb the fence into this field, which was slightly overgrown with grass and that you couldn't really see anything. And so she climbed over this fence, and then she had this urge to walk in a certain direction. She starts walking in that direction and tripped and fell. She a little bit of bruising, but she looked to see what she had tripped over, and it was the headstone for her second great grandparents that she had come to find. And they weren't even buried in town. They were buried on a farm about 5 miles out of town. And so she was able to do what do you call it when you tracings of where you put the piece of paper down and you rub the pencil over it, and all the engraving would then appear on the piece of paper. What was that? Rubbings. She was able to do rubbings of the things. But had they not had the time, and then she sort of thought, well, how did we get here? The car broke down. It had a flat tire. We had to stop to change the flat tire. She had this big urging to climb the fence and to walk in a certain direction until she literally tripped over her great-grandparents' grave, her second great-grandparents' grave, and found them. And those were the only people that were buried within that area. The rest of the family was buried at the cemetery in town. But it turned out that her second great-grandparents used to own that land, and it was passed down to her first great-grandparents. And then at some point the land was sold, but the graves were left there, and nobody thought to talk about the graves or anything else. And but that's where the second great-grandparents were buried, on their land, after they passed away. And people had forgotten that that's where they were. So, but I will tell you, why do I love going through cemeteries? One, it's very peaceful. For me, it's very calming. I like the sound of water. I will go down. I haven't gone down to the beach yet, but I like walking on wet sand. I don't like walking on the dry sand stuff. But I find the ocean noise very, very calming, which is why I love cruises. There's just water everywhere. But cemeteries bring a sense of peace to me. When I'm walking through them, I don't feel afraid. I'm just like completely, I just literally feel the stress falling off me as I walk through the cemeteries. I love reading the headstones and stuff. In fact, the place that we lived in Waitara, which is up near New Plymouth, you walk down the back of our backyard, which is where it ended at the bottom of the hill. Then you walk up the hill, which actually belonged to the city council for the cemetery, but they actually ended up giving us use of it because they couldn't bury any bodies on it or anything else. They came in and cleared it of all the gorse and other weedy stuff that was in there. And then my parents planted these trees. I went back there to that. We went to that cemetery in 2002 when I brought Brad over for his very first visit to New Zealand. And we went and we basically toured places that I had lived. It's basically what we did on that tour. And so we parked in the cemetery parking lot, and Mum and I wound our way through to the Elliots' grave. The Elliots were in this corner plot. It was a double grave with double headstones. And you had to climb onto the edge of their grave and the hedges came, one hedge came this way, one hedge came this way, and there was a gap between, they didn't meet up. The hedges weren't lined up properly. So there was a gap, and we used to walk through that gap, and we used to step over the broken barbed wire fence that was there, and then we could have access to the back, down the hill and into our backyard. And so Mum and I went to the Elliots' grave. We climbed on there. We stepped through, and the broken barbed wire fence was still there. I hadn't lived, and this was in 2002, and I left that place in 1984. Yeah, so almost 20, 30 years. Hang on. Yeah, almost 20 years. So 18 years at this point. That barbed wire broken fence was still there. We could not see the back of the house. We could not see the backyard because all the trees that my parents had planted on this hill were full mature trees that had just grown up and completely blocked out the view of the backyard and the house. We could see little bits of it through some parts of the trees. And after we had done that, because we hadn't been there, Mum and Dad hadn't been there for a while either, as we then stepped back over and we went over to the new area where all the newer graves were, all the newer burials, because the Elliots had been buried in the late 1800s. And so we then went back over to the newer section of the cemetery, and we walked up and down several rows looking to see who did we know, and who was buried there that we knew from our time living in it. Because for me, living in Whitehall, I was there for 6 years before I went into the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and that's the longest place I have ever lived in New Zealand. My longest place. I have now lived in 15 different towns and cities from one end of the country to the other. It used to be 13. I've added 2 since I got back. But Waitara was the one place in New Zealand I lived the longest. I was there for 6 years in that house, which was quite an accomplishment, I thought. Mum and Dad were there for 8. They're in a place now, they've been there for 14, 15 years. But the place before that, they'd been in 20-something years as well. So, but yeah, we went over to the newer section. We were walking up and down the rows looking for people that we knew. And because Waitara was 6,500 people, everybody knew my dad because he was the local traffic cop in town. Everybody knew my mum. She was a nurse down at the doctor's surgery. They all knew me because I coached gymnastics at the time as well. And I coached a lot of the younger kids, and I'd be walking down the street and people were going, "Hey, Helen." And I was like, "Hi." And I'm like thinking, "Oh, I have no idea who you are, but I'm going to smile and wave anyway." And I've been a parent of one of the kids I coached and that sort of stuff. So it's a pretty small town where everybody knows everybody and everybody's in everybody's business. But it was a lot of fun living there during my teenage years. So yeah, we would go up and down the rows and see who did we know that had passed away since we had last been there. So, because I was going back like 20 years, but Mum and Dad knew a few more people than I did. But they knew more of the adults. I knew more of the kids. But we had it was just really interesting going through there. And when we lived in the house, I often would go up the back fence, climb over into the cemetery, and just go for a wander through the graves and just read them and read the tombstones and the headstones and read what was on there. And then in later years, when I was doing this, when I was now researching genealogy, and I had a computer that could help me, like Ancestry and Family Tree Maker and all of that sort of stuff, I would go to cemeteries and go visiting. And if something caught my eye or something triggered something in my brain, I would write that information down and then go home and research it. So I have a lot of little trees in my Ancestry account from when I have gone to a cemetery and found a gravestone or a tombstone that piqued my interest, that I would then go and do some more research. In the cemetery at the back of our house in Waitara, they had this section that was for the little kids. It was for the infants through to it was the children's area, the babies and the children. And that was a heartbreaking piece to go through. But near that area, there was this clear grass area that was a slight hill. And there was many a Friday night that the group of friends that I would hang out with would go over to the cemetery and would all lay in the cemetery, right? Would all lay along this little hill piece that was cleared near the children's section, and we could look up at the stars And it was just fabulous. And we would just lay there and talk while we were looking up at the stars. And then all of a sudden someone would go, hey, do you see that shape up there? And see that star there? Does that look, what does that look like to you? And we'd have to use our imagination to see if did we see the same thing they saw. Cemeteries are fantastic places. I love them. I love them. And can't wait to go back to some more of the New Zealand ones where I've known people in that area to go see. If anybody that I know has passed away and that sort of thing. But I just find them so peaceful. And the information you can gain off the tombstones, like if you decide to go and research them, it can be a lot of fun. And my husband's parents are in Hollywood forever or something like that. And you go through, and some of his father's family is also entombed in there, or their ashes are interred in there. Are there as well. And so I used to remember we used to go for drives and walks. And so one time we had my mother-in-law with us, and after we'd visited her husband's crypt in the mausoleum, we then went out down to where some of the Brown side of the family were buried. Some of the people from the Brown side of the family were buried. And she would tell me stories about them and how they ended up in the cemetery, and how this one died a number of days before his mother passed away, and they didn't tell the mother that her son had died. It was like 4 days difference, and they didn't tell. There was 4 days between them. Like the son passed away, and then 4 days later his mother passed away, but they never told her because of her ill health. They didn't want the shock of learning that her son had passed away to trigger her passing away, but she passed away 4 days later anyway. And they're buried close to each other. Yeah, they're buried like a row apart from each other. And so we went and visited the relatives there, but you also got to see some other cool graves that are in there from famous people, and some of their tombstones, headstones, whatever you want to call them, are absolutely just works of art, and just absolutely incredible. And some of the stories behind them are very interesting, and some of the stories behind them is like, do you believe it? Do you not believe it? So it can make very interesting trips to cemeteries. And this one cemetery during the summertime will do movie nights at the cemetery, which I thought was really cool, because they have this massive grass area over in one area. And that's where everybody goes and sits with their picnic, and they have the big screens up, and they will play whatever movie they're playing. And I never went to one of those movie screenings, but I thought it would have been really fun to go and do. But we never did actually go. We talked about it, but we never did it. But it was just a great place to wander through, and you learn a lot about people's lives walking through cemeteries. So that's your task for today. Go visit some relatives in the local cemetery. Yeah, that's your task for the day. Go visit some if you've got relatives in a local cemetery, go visit them. And then just go for a wander around, a couple of rows down, a couple of rows back, and see if you can find other people that you know from that same era. Or just go for a walk through the local cemetery and see if you know people that are buried there. That's your task for today. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. We'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Oh, no, hang on. I'm going to be late tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific. I've got hang on, is it tomorrow? What day? I don't even know what day I'm on. Hang on one moment. Let me have a look. I got to go check. I may be on at 6 p.m. I could be on at 7 p.m. because it's not on my calendar, and it should be in my calendar. So I'm going to go put that in my calendar to see if it's tomorrow night or the following night. But go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening.